I want to start by being fully transparent and say that in addition to being flooded with all of the sort of normal imposter feelings one would be flooded with when you stand in front of a room of very smart people and attempt to say anything, I'm also a little emotional because just over 25 years ago, my dad drove me from Florida in his work van up the East Coast and down College Walk so that I could move into John Jay Hall in 1999. As a very frightened 18-year-old person. And so to be here at reunions doing this is actually very overwhelming, and I am full of gratitude. So thank you. So to Lisa and to Curtis and to Jill and your team, thank you so much for trusting me with this slice of the program. As I mentioned, I arrived at Columbia University in the city of New York as a first semester college student in 1999. And the very first person I met here was a young woman named Ariana. We were standing in front of the elevators in the bottom of John Jay Hall, waiting to bring our things up to our dorm room. I was on floor 11, which for a person who grew up in Florida felt very, very high. And while we were waiting for the elevators, Ariana, in the interest of polite conversation, asked me what I had done over my summer. And so I told her that I had spent my summer providing childcare for my special needs baby sister, Olivia, so that both of my parents could work full time. And then I said, "What did you do with your summer, Ariana?" And she told me that she had spent her summer traveling across Southeast Asia as a classically trained oboe player with the New York International Youth Philharmonic. And it was at that moment, approximately 38 seconds into my college career, that I felt like a total and complete fraud, and like I had absolutely no right whatsoever to be having the conversation I was having with the person I was having it with in the place that I was having it. Not because of anything Ariana said or did. She did nothing wrong. She was not flexing on me. She was not stepping to me. She was just describing her experience. So it wasn't anything she did, it was just because. Because what right did a person like me have speaking to, let alone going to college, with a classically trained oboe protege who had spent her summer traveling the world sharing the gift of her talent? I don't know about all of you, but I am what happens when a railroad worker meets a cocktail waitress at a country western bar off the Long Island Expressway called Matty T's. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my origin story. And I am what happens when those two people have a baby, and then another baby, and then in search of a warmer life, they move them to a rural community just off the coast, the western coast of Florida, so that we can raise chickens and Nubian dairy goats and grow radishes for the county fair and give ducklings swimming lessons in the wheelbarrow. It was adorable. It was a wonderful way to grow up. My parents were good, hardworking people, but we were not learning to play oboe in my house. And that experience did very little to prepare me for the conversation I would have in front of the elevators in John Jay Hall with Ariana. And it would do even less to prepare me for my first class in college. Literature Humanities, perhaps you've heard of it. Great books course. We were to discuss the Iliad on the first day of class. I read it over the summer 2 times just to be extra prepared. And on the first day of class, our professor, no longer at Columbia, Michael Seidel, a famous James Joyce scholar, sat in the chair in front of 14 of us, leaned back in a very professorial fashion and asked, "What did you think of the text?" And before I could so much as part my lips, the young man next to me threw his hand in the air and began a searing critique of the English translation of the ancient Greek that we had been assigned to read, because he thought it was a bit, and I quote, pedestrian. And the student across the table responded to that comment with, I swear to God, "Oh, thank God someone said it." Oh, thank God someone said it. And I'm over here readying myself to be like, I liked the book. Don't worry, though. Don't worry. I did what any self-respecting human being would do to process my shame, guilt, and embarrassment. There's a bush right next to Butler Library when you come out of Carman Hall, which is where our class was. So I saw it and I hid behind it and I cried. And I think about that a lot. I think, why did I cry? Like, why did that exchange rattle me so deeply? Is it because my ancient Greek was not existent? Maybe. Is it because I'm not even sure I really understood that we were reading it in translation? Maybe. Or was it just that exchange signaled to me very clearly that perhaps coming here was just a really bad idea? And that perhaps I had made a mistake by coming to Columbia, and even worse, perhaps Columbia had made a mistake by choosing me to come here. My professor noticed that I was withdrawn for the first 3 classes. And so he invited me to his office hours, where I decided to be honest with him. That is one thing we learned in our house, tell the truth. So I told the truth. And I told him that I felt like I didn't belong here. I told him that I felt both invisible and conspicuous at the same time, which is a weird one. Feeling like nobody can see you and feeling like everyone is watching you. And being pretty convinced that an opportunity like this probably wasn't for a person like me. I had won state milking championships for both speed and volume. But I wasn't sure that arguing about the translation of the Iliad, I'm a Lattimore guy, by the way, felt like a thing that I should be doing or that I was qualified to do. That was despite the fact, by the way, that I was surrounded on all sides by faculty and administrators and classmates who were saying, "You belong here. You belong here. This is part of it. Don't get rattled. That person is insecure. That's why we're arguing about translations of the Greek. Relax." Despite all of this feedback that I was welcome and worthy and deserving, it just felt to me like every conversation I overheard and every cultural and social fact I encountered were swirling around me and whispering to me in unison, "You do not belong here. Places like this aren't for people like you." And that was me, by the way, a white cisgender at that time closeted gay male. I can't even imagine what those whispers must have sounded like to some of my classmates. Fast forward 25 years. I'm proud to serve as the Director of Education at Columbia University's Center for Veteran Transition and Integration. Right here in Kent Hall. We'll be headed there for a reception after today. I hope you'll join us. A reception. CVTI is a force multiplier organization that works with aspirational colleges, universities, employers, and veteran service organizations to build stronger cultures of support, and through those cultures, stronger outcomes for veterans of the United States Armed Forces, transitioning service members, and their families, no matter where they go to work or where they go to school. And what's wild is one of the things I've noticed is that one of the most significant challenges that veterans face as they transition out of military service and into higher education and workforce settings is feeling like they don't belong. Feeling both invisible and conspicuous at the same time, all the time. Feeling like perhaps the opportunities they have earned aren't really for people like them. And in my work with those veterans, and in my work with non-traditionally aged students at Columbia School of General Studies, where I worked in the Dean of Students office for many years as an academic advisor, I just kept coming up against students. Smart, talented, ferociously hardworking students. Students who were so much more prepared and deserving of this education than I was when I was here. Those same students constantly saying to me, I feel like I don't belong here. I feel like I'm not deserving. I feel like someone made a mistake. And I'm like, who's saying that to you? And they're like, no one's saying that to me, but that's how I feel. And I thought, something's happening here. Something's happening here. Why is this happening? Why did it happen to me? Why does it still happen to me? And why is it happening to these extraordinary people who are in this extraordinary space? And that's where I developed my interest in this thing we call imposter syndrome. So today, my talk is entitled, What My Students Taught Me About Imposter Syndrome. You will notice imposter syndrome is in quotes, on purpose, for a reason, which we will discuss in just a few minutes. We're going to talk about what it is, what it looks like, what it sounds like, critically, how we talk about it as a society, and then I want to offer you what I believe to be a pretty powerful reframe that has really helped me in my work with students and has then helped those students in their pursuits in both higher education and workforce settings. What is imposter syndrome? Or a better question, I would argue, what are imposter feelings? And by the end of this talk, you'll understand why I sort of reject the premise of the first question and sort of put my arms around the premise of the second question, talking about these experiences as a set of feelings, as emotional data points, rather than as some sort of pathological idea. What are they? Feelings of self-doubt, insecurity, discomfort, and/or incompetence, despite evidence that you are welcome, worthy, deserving, and capable. This is very important to say at the outset, and I just want to, if I could climb to the top of the building and scream it at the campus, I would. Feeling uncomfortable, feeling out of place, feeling like you don't belong, when your environment is telling you that you don't belong, that is not imposter feelings. That is you having a healthy response to your environment. So I want to get this very, very clear. Imposter feelings are not possible when your environment is in fact signaling to you in ways both implicit and explicit that you are not welcome. If you feel unwelcome when you're not welcome, that's just you responding to your environment in a healthy way, and that's a different conversation to have. Imposter feelings are this really unique, persistent feeling of unbelonging in spaces that are communicating explicitly to you that you do belong. Even though the data that you're getting tells you this is okay, in the back of your mind, you can't help but feel like it's not. You distrust the information around you that is telling you this is a safe place to be, I'm worthy, I'm deserving. That is the unique sort of cognitive characteristic of imposter feelings. What do they look like? I want to be clear, I'm not a behavioral health professional or a clinical psychologist. These observations come from 20 years of deep connections with non-traditionally aged undergraduate students and sort of a lot of ethnography with the population. And through that work, I have found 5 primary hallmarks of this thing. As I list them, you might just think a little bit about if any of these have ever presented themselves to you, if you might be familiar with one or some, or if you're like me, maybe all of them. Self-undervaluation. I don't know if there are any self-undervaluers in the room. Feelings of being out of place, conspicuous, not belonging, undeserving. This is when you're in an environment and you just can't shake the feeling that everyone sees you, even though you also a little bit feel like no one can see you. Persistent, often internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. A willingness to ignore or refuse the value of your own accomplishments and achievements. This is closely related to self-undervaluation, except self-undervaluation is I undervalue me as a human being. This is I undervalue the things I bring to the table. In a team setting, what I bring to the table is never the most valuable thing. It's always someone else's thing that is valuable. And my personal favorite, a tendency to attribute success to external factors, such as luck or timing or team, rather than internal factors, such as intelligence, talent, or work ethic. These are the 5 big hitter feelings, not a comprehensive or exhaustive list, but what I have seen in my 20 years of working with students, the things that people are most consistently reporting to me when they're struggling with this thing we would call imposter syndrome. Here's what it sounds like in an advisor's office. These are real quotes from real students, anonymized and shared with permission. I'll be sitting in class and the door to the lecture hall will open and I realize I'm low-key worried that it might be someone from admissions coming to revoke my acceptance. It's part of this quiet, nagging feeling I have that my being here has to be a mistake or an oversight or a glitch, like I must have slipped through the cracks somehow and it's only a matter of time before somebody figures it out. This is the experience I had when the very first person I met was a classically trained oboe protege. Okay? And how it presents, please excuse me, how it presents is, oh shit. It's that moment in your internal monologue. Oh shit. You feel suddenly exposed. You feel suddenly exposed, like something is wrong. Something is wrong. The other thing I love about this particular quote is you'll notice here, this is not a completely debilitating, right, experience. It's a low-key worry, a quiet, nagging feeling. So this isn't something that stops us from moving through the world and doing what we need to do. But it's always there, and it gets louder at particular moments, especially when we come across difficulty or failure. That's when it really pipes up and says, I told you. I've been telling you this was a mistake, and the second we're always looking for evidence of that, we somehow immediately find it. I remember the day Columbia accepted me, I opened my letter, I read it, and I immediately thought to myself, this is because I'm a veteran. It never occurred to me that I might have been qualified or worthy in any other way. It never occurred to me that they might have wanted me because I was, well, me. This is one of those moments, really, really interesting moments, where that hallmark I talked to you about, attributing success to external rather than internal factors, where here, the veteran status or the history of service, rather than understanding it as an internal quality, it gets externalized as something outside of me, and that's the reason for X, Y, or Z. It's a really fascinating cognitive phenomenon. Imagine thinking about your GPA as somehow not part of you. Oh, they took me because of my grades. You know, those things you completely busted your ass to get, right? So this really interesting sort of tendency to externalize things we ourselves have achieved so that we can say, it must be that and not me. Anything but me. Anything but me. What gives me the right to be here? So this was my exact question in John Jay Hall. What right do I have speaking to, let alone going to college with this person? So there's what it is and what it looks like and what it sounds like, but what I'm going to argue for you today is that it's how we talk about it as a society where the problem is. I think this is very, very problematic in our higher education settings, in our schools, in our workplaces, how we think about this thing. I want you to imagine a student who identifies as a woman who is in a STEM laboratory. This is based on a true story. The PI of that lab, the primary investigator of that lab, is also a woman. That student is an undergraduate student, an advanced undergraduate student, begins doing research in that lab, does wonderful work for 6 months, but can't shake the feeling that she's just not fitting in this lab. Feels like it's not a good fit, not sure what's going on. Goes to her PI and says, "This is how I feel." And that person, with very good intentions, says to that student, "Do not worry, you just have imposter syndrome. Don't worry about it, you're good." That student then does what we all do when we have a malady, goes to the Google machine. Have you ever gone to the Google machine when your ankle hurts? Don't do it, because you're gonna have 3 days to live, okay? She goes to the Google machine, and she finds this. Just a random search. This, by the way, is a search for imposter phenomenon, not even imposter syndrome. How to fight back, how to battle the types of imposter syndrome, psychology today, how I cured myself of imposter syndrome. We even have this wonderful cottage industry of YouTube videos, the most ironic of which is how to cure imposter syndrome for pre-meds and medical students. Imposter syndrome causes, signs, symptoms, diagnosis. We talk about imposter syndrome 2 ways, either as a psychological phenomenon to be managed, mitigated, treated, or cured. That's the syndrome language that you're so familiar with. Not the name it was given when it was created, by the way, by 2 female faculty members in the 1960s who referred to it as imposter phenomenon. And then popular culture got a hold of it and said, syndrome's better. And we still, to this day, are much more likely to refer to it as a syndrome. If we're not, in the 80% of the time we talk about it as a psychological phenomenon to be managed, mitigated, treated, or cured, we are talking about it as a moral failing, as a negative personality trait, as a personal or professional liability. And in every case, if we are experiencing imposter feelings, or if we have imposter syndrome, it is of course incumbent upon us to solve that problem. Never mind why we're feeling it, never mind the environment we're in, right? This is a problem that we need to solve. And here's the thing about high-achieving people. All right, let's go. What do I have to do to solve it? And that's when you do this Google search. That's when you go to the American Psychological Association. And you see better language, by the way, imposter phenomenon, I like that. But you'll notice still, experts share why imposter feelings arise and how psychologists can overcome them and best help others with the same struggle. So we're still embattled. No matter what words we use, we're still embattled. My favorite, Harvard Business Review, "You're not an imposter, you're actually pretty amazing, complete with a hybrid zebra unicorn with a rainbow horn." So I thought, I'm feeling good about this. This is what I've been saying. We got to find better ways to talk about this. Okay, Kess, I like your style. And then I read the summary, which you can't read in the back. "Imposter syndrome is a battle that you can and with practice will win. Here are a few research-backed tips that can help," and then apparently we're supposed to use social media mindfully. Okay. Why? Why is this deeply pathologized, super fraught way of thinking about this thing so prevalent? Why have we, as a culture, bought in so deeply to this notion that these things are bad and that we need to fix them as soon as possible? It's incumbent upon us to fix this brokenness. First of all, it's incredibly prevalent. If you wouldn't mind raising your hand if you've ever had an imposter feeling. Okay, it's pretty prevalent. Ironically or not, it's also more prevalent in high-achieving populations. The higher achieving, the more prevalent it becomes. There are multiple peer-reviewed studies to suggest meaningful negative impacts associated with imposter phenomenon, including pay gaps, achievement gaps, and persistence gaps in both educational and workforce settings, which means that people who report experiencing this thing are more likely to have negative outcomes associated with it. Okay? We also know that it is linked, not causation, but correlation between other wellness issues such as anxiety and depression, meaning we are more likely to see higher rates of anxiety and depression when people are also telling us they experience imposter feelings. And we know it's more prevalent among minority populations. And here, by that, I mean simply when someone can perceive a meaningful difference between themselves and the majority of the people around them. That can be racial or ethnic minority. That can be a female-identified person in the United States Armed Forces. It can also be a male-identified person in an elementary school setting, for example. Wherever you can perceive a meaningful difference between yourself and the people around you. I want to say briefly here that the very best work on this, perhaps not surprisingly, is being done by two women of color. This is an article in the Harvard Business Review, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And what they argue, and what I think is increasingly prevalent, is understanding the role that institutions play in generating imposter culture. Imposter syndrome directs our view toward fixing women at work instead of fixing the places where women work. You see here there's a move to suddenly take this thing that's been living inside the feeler and put it in the context of the environments that these feelers are moving through. For many women, feeling like an outsider isn't an illusion. It's the result of systemic bias and exclusion. So this is a movement that I think is important in the field. So what do we do about this? Do I give you a list of 4 or 5 steps that you're supposed to follow so you'll never experience imposter syndrome again? No. I don't think that that's how we do this. I think there's a better way. And it involves reimagining how these things work in the first place. And to do that, I'll just draw your attention to one of the most wonderful TED Talks on the internet with one of the least compelling titles for a TED Talk on the internet, How to Make Stress Your Friend. This is a very, very smart talk. If you have 14 minutes and 16 seconds, I highly recommend it. This is Professor Kelly McGonigal, who works at Stanford. She's a stress psychologist. She gives an extraordinary TED Talk about a career's worth of findings where she discovers that when people come to their stress psychologist for stress, what are they always looking for? Stress reduction, stress management, stress relief. Relieve my stress, help me manage my stress, help me mitigate my stress. And she started to realize over the course of her career that always being the first discussion immediately casts the stress response in a negative light, and that perhaps some of the outcomes people were experiencing from their stress outcomes wasn't about the stress itself, but was about their belief that the stress response was negative. In other words, not doing any stress education about the eustress curve, for example. She comes to the conclusion very intelligently and perhaps intuitively, when you change your mind about stress, you can change your body's response to stress. And so my argument would be here really quickly, and we're going to perform it now. What if we were able to change our mind about these imposter feelings that we all experience? And if we could change our mind about them, could we start to mitigate some of the negative effects that have been measured that are associated with this thing? Here are hallmarks: self-undervaluation, feeling out of place, fear of being exposed as a fraud, a willingness to ignore or refuse the value of your own accomplishments and achievements, and attributing success to external rather than internal factors. What if we change our perception of these like 25 degrees? What if instead of being self-undervaluing, what if we are modest or unassuming or shy? I mean, just bear with me here. What if that's the thing that we're calling self-undervaluation? What if instead of feeling out of place or not belonging or undeserving, what if that's just being new to your environment? What if it wasn't that Columbia wasn't for a person like me? What if it was I was new to Columbia? I just tried to get into the door here at Mathematics Hall with my ID and it wouldn't work. And I felt like I was losing my mind. And of course, it's Saturday and I don't work in Mathematics Hall. But for 2 seconds, I'm like, I don't belong here. No, I don't not belong here. I just haven't been to Mathematics Hall on a weekend recently. But the leap to not deserving, the leap to unbelonging is lightning quick. In a lot of situations where we feel a little bit out of place because we're a little bit out of place. Do we need to pathologize that instantly? Are we afraid of being exposed as a fraud, or are we just vulnerable and unfamiliar? Are we unwilling to acknowledge the value of our own contributions and achievements, or do we have a generous ethos? And do we attribute success to external rather than internal factors, or are we just a humble person? This yellow list of qualities is a pretty attractive list of qualities. And it's a list of qualities I so often see in the very same students who are coming to me to tell me that they are experiencing imposter feelings. But they wouldn't list it like it's listed in yellow. They would list it the way it's listed in white. The other thing no one's talking about is here are some other characteristics that we find associated with people who report imposter feelings. Consistently high achieving, high self-performance standards, enthusiastic to celebrate team over self, alert, adept readers of the environment, hungry for feedback, and willing to grow. It is not at all surprising that I see a lot of imposter feelings in my military-connected students, because I also see this set of qualities in my military-connected students and my non-traditional students broadly. This is a list of qualities that I want to hire. This is a list of qualities that I want to recruit. This is a list of qualities I want to work with on a project. This is a list of qualities I want coaching my kids on the soccer field. This is a list of qualities I want holding public office. And they're all intimately connected to the same set of people who claim to experience imposter feelings. So my question is, are we actually talking about a different thing? I know it doesn't feel at the moment like humility's having a renaissance in our national moment. But if you think about individual organizations, people are thinking about humility very, very differently than they did even 20 years ago. I don't know that you would be seeing these kinds of headlines in the earlier part 20 years ago. And again, I know this seems a little counterintuitive at this exact moment, but if you think organization by organization, you'll see that this thing called humility is being treated a little bit less like a soft skill than it used to be. And I think it's very, very closely related, again, to this imposter feelings index. So my question for you is this, and I just want to offer a little bit of a change in language here. Are we suffering from imposter syndrome, or are we modeling something different, something like humility in action. Are we suffering from imposter syndrome, or are we having a healthy response to aspiration? This, by the way, is the thing that connects every single student I have ever worked with who has come to me and said, this is how I feel. They're not all in a particular major. They're not all at a particular school. They're not all pursuing a particular path. But one thing that is true of every single one of them without exception is if they are experiencing an imposter feeling, they are always already engaged in a moment of aspiration. Always. They are always already engaged in a moment of striving, trying something new, taking a risk, or growing in some way. That is why places like Columbia spark these feelings, because Columbia is an aspirational place where people are doing aspirational things. And when you enter aspirational spaces, the organic byproduct of that is imposter feelings. You know where you'll never feel an imposter feeling in your entire life, ever? Your couch at home. Preferably with the rescue beagles or whatever creature you've rescued. Maybe it's your spouse, I don't know. Whatever your rescue is, on the couch, you want a cure to imposter syndrome? I have it for you. Never leave your couch. I'm serious. I can cure it. I don't need 5 steps. Never leave your couch and watch Ted Lasso on repeat for the rest of your life. And you will never have an imposter feeling ever again, because you are fully safe. Because that is not an aspirational place. And by the way, we have a little bit of an aspiration addiction in America. Like if we're not aspiring, we're immediately failing. Because I got up and I had a cup of coffee instead of getting on the Peloton, I'm the worst. Because for 2 seconds I wasn't aspiring actively. Right? Relax. We can't aspire without anti-aspirational spaces also. They're like the phone charger for our soul. But those are places where you will never experience an imposter feeling. So when I tell students who are like, oh, I'm broken. Oh, I shouldn't be here. And then you're like, no, actually those feelings you're having, those are actually a completely natural thing that happens when you do what you're doing. You came to Columbia to meet classically trained oboe proteges. That's why you came here, dum-dum. You didn't want to meet a bunch of radish farmers, did you? You wanted to meet other kinds of people. And the thing you're experiencing as rattling you is just a perception of difference, which is what you came here for. Here's another fun one. Is this just what growth feels like? I want you to imagine a universe where you go to a gym. This is probably like the thesis of my entire time as an advisor of undergraduate students at the School of General Studies. I have students come into my office, and they're like, I'm really struggling in X. We'll call it college algebra just because that's a lot of the times what it is, but whatever. I'm struggling in college algebra. Cool. What does that mean? It's hard. Okay, I should probably drop it. Whoa, 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 whoa. What do you mean it's hard? It just isn't coming easy, and everyone's good at it, and I'm just, okay. So let me pause that. You go to a gym, you pay a very expensive set of personal trainers to make you stronger. And after your first workout, you wake up the next morning, and what do you feel? So you feel sore. You feel really sore. You feel so sore that you kind of hate yourself. And when you feel that soreness, how do you then feel about the soreness? You feel good about it. Why? Because it's working. The discomfort is proof that you did something. Okay? This is like so intuitive to us. My husband will wake up in the morning after a workout. He can't get out of bed. I'm like, are you okay? He's like, it's awesome. I'm like, you don't look well. It's awesome. I mean, it's like so the connection between discomfort and making progress toward our goals is so intuitive. In fact, I would argue, if you went to Columbia University personal training and you weren't really sore after your workouts, how would you feel? Cheated? Swindled? Like someone wasn't doing for you what they promised to do for you? Then we come here to this place, maybe even into this room in Mathematics Hall, and we take a college algebra course and it's hard and we're like, I suck at math, I can't do it. I should have never been here. I don't belong at Columbia. Opportunities like this aren't for people like me. And you're like, whoa, 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 right? Why is it that discomfort in these settings set off those kind of reactions, whereas discomfort in other settings seems to signal to us that actually what we want to happen is in the process of happening? By the way, I'm not here to be toxically positive. Distress is distress, right? Let's all be clear. We can injure ourselves at the gym, and we can injure ourselves in the classroom. So we need to be mindful, right? But what we need to not do is we need to not immediately interpret difficulty or discomfort as a sign that we are doing something wrong, because very often it is a sign that we are doing something exactly right. That's why when that young woman goes to her PI in her laboratory and says, I'm doing really good work, but I just don't feel like I belong here, I'd say step number one, we need to look at the culture of the laboratory. Let's have a conversation about the institutional factors that are at play. Are you the only female undergraduate in the lab? Well, maybe that has something to do with it. So before we take that on, let's have a conversation about that. But then also, instead of saying you have imposter syndrome, maybe we could talk instead about something like aspiration discomfort. Imagine being told you have aspiration discomfort instead of being told you have imposter syndrome. That's right. You're screwed 2 times. Go to the Google machine now. I'm going to give you a third one. How about instead of imposter syndrome, you're experiencing something called striving fatigue? I studied English literature for a really long time, and I really do believe that the language that we use to talk about things has a profound effect on how people register them and the outcomes that we receive. And I think talking about striving fatigue is a much more productive way to think about imposter syndrome. And I think when you tell somebody that what they are experiencing is probably striving fatigue, I think it sets an entirely new context for having the discussion about what's next. I've even tried at my adult literacy nonprofit in Ocala, Florida, being awesome soreness. You can call it whatever Sesame Street thing you want to. But I think my point here is that there are better ways to talk about this. I also just want to call your attention to Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. If you're not adding yet to the end of your sort of understandable and reasonable complaints about what you can't do, I can't get into Mathematics 312 on Saturday yet. But now I know that my access to Kent Hall doesn't give me access to math, and so when I try to swipe on Saturday, I won't be able to get in, and I'm gonna need a hand. It's not that I don't belong at Columbia University. And these are very often the types of things that my students say to me that are making them feel like maybe a place like this isn't for a person like them. In my area of work, there's a lot of misinformation about the broken veteran stereotype. It's one of the things that my colleagues and I at the Center for Veteran Transition and Integration are working very, very hard to provide better language for, not just here at Columbia, but across the United States. And I really, really do think that this becoming model is a much more productive way to think about the discomfort that comes with change and evolution. The work of becoming something different is hard work. The last thing I'll do just for fun, and then I'd love to take some questions if you have them. I taught literature as a graduate student at Harvard for many, many years, and the only learning outcome that ever really mattered to me was that they could write more compellingly and clearly at the end of my intervention with them, but also that they would leave my class suspicious of binary oppositions. Binary oppositions are dangerous, and whenever you encounter them, you should immediately recognize that some sort of dastardly work is being done. So I thought, what better way to end the presentation than to give you a binary opposition? That is, if imposter syndrome is so bad, if imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon that needs to be managed, mitigated, treated, and cured, if we all need Oprah to tell us how to not have imposter syndrome anymore, then it must be really bad. And so my assumption would be, according to the logic of binary oppositions, that the opposite thing should be good. We'll use Tarzan logic. Imposter syndrome, bad. Opposite of imposter syndrome, good. So let's try that just for fun. Instead of self-undervaluation, we now have overconfidence in the self. Instead of feeling out of place, we feel entitled to be where we are. We feel like we belong at every table we sit at. You already know someone like this. You're thinking of him or her because they come to Thanksgiving dinner and you don't like it. You know who it is, it's your weird uncle or somebody, and they're this person. And you don't like that person because they have this set of traits. Instead of fear of being exposed as a fraud, they feel unself-conscious, self-assured, and smug. Instead of refusing their own accomplishments, they willingly ignore the value of other people's accomplishments in the interest of self-promotion, and they hoard credit for success rather than attributing it to external factors. So let's pretend I didn't give you a reframe at all today. Let's pretend that the end of my speech was, this is imposter syndrome and it's okay to have it, which is not how I feel at all. My feeling is that imposter feelings are an organic byproduct of aspiring. But even if I did, what I would tell you here is that I would take the qualities in white every single time over the qualities in yellow. I would hire the imposter every day. I would recruit the imposter every day. I would rather be led by the imposter every day before I would do the other thing, which I think is what we call a narcissist. Do yourselves a favor. I just taught Ovid's Metamorphoses, and I taught the myth of Narcissus. If you haven't read Ovid's Myth of Narcissus recently, it's like 4 pages long. He nails narcissism 2,000 years ago in a way that's really, really frightening. That's your core curriculum reference for the day. If you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll see the word imposter in my description. Because I think we need to start owning this word in a little bit of a different way. And the last thing I'll say is that telling my students that what they are feeling is okay is probably the single most important intervention to them moving past it. You'll remember I went to Michael Seidel's office hours after my 3rd Lit Hum class because I told him that I didn't think this was going to work. And what he said to me in that office was, what you are feeling is completely natural. And that young man arguing with me about the Greek translation is his way of coping with the same exact feelings you are having. You cried behind a bush. He came at me about the translation. And they're the same exact thing. And that conversation, trust me, I manage it all the time still because I'm trying to aspire still. Because I do get off the couch with the rescue beagles. And I have actual rescue beagles and a rescue husband, and they're both on the couch. So I still manage these things all the time, and the reason for that is because there is no cure if you continue to aspire. And if you're here at reunions and you're staying connected to your communities from Columbia University, then presumably you are all doing that too. So the bad news is there is no cure. The great news is there is no cure. Thank you so much for your time, and I'd love to get questions if you have them.